Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to an immigrating episode of The Gold Standard with Alan Mosley. And here's your host, Alan Mosley.
Guys, welcome back for another episode of the Gold Standard Podcast. I am your host, Alan Mosley, and you can follow us on social media, which is facebook.com/TGSAlanMosley. Twitter is @AlanandMosley, but you don't have to do any of that.
Nope.
You can just go to our website, which is thegoldstandardpodcast.com. Also consider supporting the show by becoming a member of our Patreon, which is patreon.com/TGSAlanMosley. Blake, check this out. Go to the laptop. I actually have all this laid out, ready for people to look at.
Okay.
So I got a message from a viewer that said, I saw your show, looks cool, but I don't typically watch videos. Do you have audio anywhere? My man, we've been on all your favorite podcasting platforms, including iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play for like 2 years or something ridiculous. So first of all, check out, look at that. That's Facebook. And this is TGS Alan Mosley on Facebook. We premiere the shows every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock.
Yep.
And then there's Twitter, which is @Alan and Mosley, which again, latest episode's always at the top. There's me making fun of people, all the type of stuff you get. I know Ron Paul's still in the front, but really, look, he's a good looking good.
That's
he's
right.
looking good, so that's why Ron Paul's still there.
Why would you ever get rid of that? You know?
But you always have, Stitcher,
Yep.
Google Play,
Yep.
iTunes.
Yep.
My man, you must not have been listening to all of our advertisements.
I know.
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I'm just saying. And then there's our Patreon where you've got the different levels. Look, you can be a real libertarian for only $1 a month.
Yes, sir. That's all it costs.
That's peak capitalism, that you pay me to be a real libertarian.
That's about the true value, so, you know.
And also, if you're the opposite of this guy and you're thinking, I'm really missing out by not seeing all the graphics and memes and stuff they're sharing, guys, TGS Alan Mosley.
That's right.
The Gold Standard with Alan Mosley. You can go to YouTube, which is kind of like our pseudo-free database
It's
for
what
all
we
of
have
our
to
videos.
have. You know, what are you going to do?
By the way, there's last week with the Willimowskis. It looked really
So
cool.
cool.
So everything's there.
Yeah.
It's been there since day one.
What are you missing?
I don't know what these people are talking about. So anyway, we're going to talk about a few of our friends really quick. We're going to start with the other 3%. Let's get a head start on this one. Julian Assange didn't kill himself.
Well, is he dead? He's not dead.
No, he's not dead.
He's not dead.
Oh, he will be.
He will be.
I shouldn't say that. That's horrible to say. I'm really sorry for saying that.
No.
I'm just saying I don't have a lot of hope is what I'm really saying.
Well, come on. You got to have some hope, you know.
So you can find them at the other 3% on Facebook. Look what they always you always have all this really awesome content.
Oh, yeah.
That's at theother3%.com. They do have some other pages as well associated with them, but you'll find them all there.
And some mighty fine Epstein didn't kill himself memes, by the way.
Yeah.
Which I'm really loving.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I scrolled by my favorite one for
It's
today.
like you're reading the ingredients of mayonnaise, and Epstein didn't kill himself. Yeah.
Also, there's our friends Nick and Matt over at the Status Quo podcast.
Yeah.
That is thestatusquo.net. Look at that, episode 53, the bonus army. So we kind of skipped over doing a Veterans Day thing.
We did.
But we have a good reason, and we'll get to that here in just a second. So here's the bonus army, episode 53. In observance of Veterans Day 2019, we thought we'd tell some veteran stories, but not the usual tales of courage and the allure of battle. Instead, we wanted to share a veteran story that never gets told, the events surrounding the bonus army. In 32, in the depths of great economic catastrophe in the modern era caused by the Federal Reserve. I like how they added that. Added that little tidbit in there.
Yeah.
A group of World War I veterans marched on D.C. to claim early the cash bonuses they had been promised by Congress for their wartime service. Not only does this tale not get told enough, but even the history of the age surrounding it is distorted.
Imagine that.
That's pretty good. So they actually did a good Veterans Day episode. I'll tell you why we didn't do a Veterans Day episode. You can switch back to the studio. We didn't because we actually have the author of this book. Good over on that camera. We have the veteran.
Yeah.
Look at that. Bryan Caplan and Zach Weinersmith did Open Borders, the Science and Ethics of Immigration. So Bryan Caplan is going to be with us right after the break. Good. And if you're wondering why we're kind of rushing today, it's because, the interview went a little long.
It did.
It went a little long, but it's not, okay.
It's worth it, though.
Okay, so you know how I always like to do when we're in a hurry, I waste time.
Yeah.
So let me explain, though, for people at home. It's not a tedious long. It's, first of all, we've done long episodes in the past, so give us a break. But this interview is jam-packed. You've got all the open border stuff. We go back to his earlier books like The Myth of the Rational Voter, The Case Against Education.
Yeah.
And then, possibly more importantly than all of that, Bryan and I talk about how we would fix the final season of Game of Thrones.
Okay. Awesome.
I know how
Awesome.
excited you are.
I'm so thrilled.
Why would you lie to me it's my show and you lie to my face? It's ridiculous. I can't even talk to you.
I'm sorry.
Guys, we will be back with Dr. Bryan Caplan right after this break. Hey, did you see the playoff games last weekend?
Oh, you're into the sports ball game.
Sports Ball with Mike Meharry and Alan Mosley. SportsBallPodcast.com.
Sports ball is not a libertarian sports show. It's a sports show done by a couple of libertarians.
For when you need your bread and circuses.
Your ad could be playing right now, reaching thousands of potential customers. Sadly, it's not, but it could be. Find out how to be an advertised sponsor for The Gold Standard with Alan Mosley. Email us at tgsalanmosley@gmail.com. Guys, welcome back to the show. Our guest today is not just any old author. No, he is a New York Times best-selling author of his most recent book that I actually have right here at the desk. It's Open Borders, The Science and Ethics of Immigration. He's also an economics professor at George Mason University and has written other fine books as well, two of my absolute favorites, by the way, which is The Myth of the Rational Voter, as well as one you've heard us talk about on this program several times, The Case Against Education. Dr. Bryan Caplan. Bryan, welcome to the show.
I'm delighted to be here.
Well, I mean, you have to be delighted to be here when you have a host that says these are all my favorite books, right?
Absolutely.
So let's get started right off the bat. Let's presume that our audience really has little to no knowledge of immigration debate as a general rule, other than, they're going to take our jobs and I'm scared of change. So what is open borders and what do we have right now?
Well, you could say it's just being not at all scared of change, but the main thing the book does is it starts with the presumptive case of just saying, look, if a person wants to come here to make a better life, why not let them do it? If there's someone who's suffering in Haiti and he can just get on a boat and move to Miami and shine shoes and suddenly he's doing a lot better, his family's doing better, why would you ever want to say no to that? And then I go through all the reasons people have given to say no. So I've got chapters on the economic effects, on the fiscal effects, cultural effects, political effects. And the main thing I say there is the economic effects are not only not bad, they are tremendously good, because when people move from places where the productivity is low to where the productivity is high, they don't just enrich themselves, they enrich mankind. And so in the book, I've got a thought experiment where you've got 1 million farmers in Antarctica. They're eking out a bare existence, just surviving on the snow. And then what happens if a country lets them leave and move there, right? And obviously the Antarcticans are better off, but they're not the only ones who are better off, because when they move, they grow a lot more food. They're not going to eat all that food themselves. Instead, what they do is sell it, and that enriches everyone who consumes their products. So when economists have tried to measure how much of an economic gain does the world get from allowing free migration, they've come up with the very biggest number that any economist has ever come up for any economic reform, something along the lines of doubling the GDP of the world just from letting people leave countries where their productivity is low to places where the productivity is high, and going to places where the productivity is high, right? And that is really the cornerstone of the affirmative case for. It's not just a terrible thing to do to someone for a bad reason, but when people leave, they are actually helping their own lives by helping the world. And then the rest of the book, I go over the other concerns about immigration, but always with this looming fact in the background of we can get many trillions of dollars of gains every single year from doing this. So whatever other problems there are or might be, they'd have to be in that same ballpark of many trillions of dollars a year, even to be a semi-plausible case against. And I just say that when you actually put a price tag on these problems, they're just a rounding error, even in the worst case scenario. So this is reform that is radical, but it's not a fundamental transformation of society. It's just tearing down one set of regulations that have been around for about 100 years and replacing them with a free market.
Now, I remember growing up and being in elementary school and hearing all the cliches of, well, America's a melting pot, right? We're a nation of immigrants. Well, if that's true, then then what's wrong with the immigration status or the state of immigration today? I mean, is it not possible right now for people to immigrate the way you're describing?
All right. Well, now we have a much stricter set of regulation than during the golden age of immigration. So basically, the U.S. had almost open borders when I'm talking about until about 100 years ago. Mm-hmm. There were certain exceptions for Chinese and Japanese, but Latin America had totally free migration into the U.S., Europe, of course. So, with like very small restrictions for things like prostitutes, mm-hmm. right? So anyway. About 100 years ago in the 1920s, there were two sets of laws that were passed. There was one that limited immigration a lot, and another that almost eliminated it, actually, for decades, right? And then in the 1960s, there was some deregulation, mostly unintentional. If you're like, we can talk about the actual story of what happened, but it's a strange case where we deregulated even though the people involved didn't want deregulation, but they just screwed up on their own terms. But in any case, the main thing to know is that while regulation is not as regulated as it was in 1960, it's still very tightly restricted. It is very fair to call regulations draconian. And again, just to get an idea, I think it is very reasonable to say that current immigration keeps out 98% of the people who want to be here. Right. So mm-hmm. We still have this idea of being a nation of immigrants, and it's true that our foreign-born share has risen a lot, and we are getting close to the peak that we had before the immigration restrictions were enacted. But still, given modern communication and transportation and just modern conditions, we would have a much higher share if people were free to move.
Now, I'm going to play devil's advocate for a few of the key arguments that you make in the book.
Have it any other way?
Yeah, exactly. So, look, I'm originally from Middle Tennessee, and that's where we're broadcasting from right now. We're just a little bit south of Nashville. So this is a red state, although it has huge pockets of blue, other major cities like Knoxville, Nashville, Memphis. But I would definitely say if I went out on the sidewalk right now outside the studio and said, hey guys, let me talk to you about open borders, I would probably be shouted down, maybe have things thrown at me, generally be shunned from all the polite society around me. And one of their key arguments would be, well, look at right now, for instance. Not only do they not want open borders, they actually want immigration to be way more restricted because they're looking at undocumented, illegal immigrants, undocumented immigrants around the mid-state, and they're saying, well, things are only going to go from bad to worse, right? Like we have an infrastructure that can only handle X. Our roads can only handle X people. Our power grid can only handle X people. Our water systems can only handle X people. If half of Mexico or Argentina or Chile immigrates to Tennessee, then that's going to be the end of our infrastructure, right?
Right. So this is a simple argument from crowding, which, of course, if you believed it, would also mean that you wouldn't want to get population growth in your area either, right? So it's much more common these days for places to worry about losing population than about having excessive population. But anyway, main thing to say about all complaints about population, whether it is native or foreign, is that, first of all, these problems are only short run, because in the longer run, you can just go and build more. And this is what people have done for many centuries. This is the way that any country that has an expanding population or any place where the cities are expanding, this is what they do. Right, is they build more. It's not that hard. Any dummy can figure out how to do it over the longer run. So in terms of immigration, I guess the main concern would be that with open borders, vast numbers would come immediately. And here, it is true that you would probably get a lot of people coming, even in the short run, but it's not going to be half of an entire country moving overnight. There's a lot of work on how it is that migration happens, and there are two views that are wrong. One is that people just don't want to come because people are so married to their home culture they wouldn't leave. And that's totally wrong. People are not married to the home culture. Lots of people want to leave. But the other view is that they would all move overnight. And that's wrong too. When borders get opened, unless people are fleeing from war or something like that, there's at first usually only a few people who come. But rather, what is true is that immigration snowballs. It starts off when there's no one from your country, only a few come, the bravest people who aren't afraid to be the only people from Mongolia in your country. But once those few people show up, then they write home, and then there's the second bravest group that says, all right, now that those people are there, we'll go, and then third group. And so it gradually builds and builds and builds. And the best example of this is Puerto Rico, where in 1902 there was a Supreme Court case that legally established open borders between the U.S. and Puerto Rico. At first, only a few thousand Puerto Ricans came. So you might say, see, Puerto Ricans just don't want to live here. It's too different from their home country. It's too cold, whatever. But over the course of a century, that Puerto Rican immigration snowballed, and now over half of all people of Puerto Rican descent are here. But it did take a long time, which means there's plenty of time to go and sort out issues about crowding. Now, the other thing to remember is that people, when they hear about new population, they generally only think about the bad parts of the crowding, and there are some bad things about having higher population, especially in the short run, but they forget about all the good things, and they fail to do a proper net analysis of all good minus all bad. So if you just want to get an idea of what that would look like, you can go to New York and you can see it does have a lot of these crowding problems you're talking about, and yet somehow the real estate prices are astronomical, right? And why? Why do people pay so much to live in a place with so much traffic and crowding? And the answer is because population also gives you lots of good things. Population also gives you lots of job opportunities, lots of entertainment opportunities, lots of dining opportunities, lots of cultural opportunities. And what we see when we look at a place like New York with heavy crowding and look at those high prices, that's saying that when people are weighing all the bad effects of population against all the good effects of population, people consider the net package to be fantastically good, right? And that's the most important thing to know. This isn't just about immigration. This is about population growth in general, which is that through their actions, not their words, people show that they would much rather live in a place with all the problems of population and all the good things of population than go and move to the middle of nowhere, where you get rid of all the congestion, but you also get rid of all the opportunities created by all those other people.
Now, I know that there's the minarchist type. I hesitate to say the phrase constitutional conservative because I'm not too sure where to find those. But so I prefer to use the minarchist type that would say, well, look, I'm generally pro-liberty. I sympathize with what you're saying. But while I would like to do that ethically, we can't do that right now because we have a welfare state. And if you had this huge influx of people that were all getting on welfare, then again, that would be a different system that would crumble.
Right. So theoretically, it's a totally sensible argument. It could be true. So in the book, I'm arguing with Milton Friedman, who's the most famous source of this argument, saying you cannot have unrestricted immigration in a welfare state. But what I say is that it really all depends upon the numbers. If you had a welfare state that gave everybody a penny per lifetime, would this mean you couldn't have open borders? No. If you had one where it gave everybody $1 million a year, could you have open borders? Or like I used to say, you give them a penny, then yes, you totally could have open borders. If you give them $1 million a year, could you do it? Then that would be devastating. So the question is, where in the real world are we on this continuum between it being a trivial problem or being a devastating problem? And again, this is one where you have to go and do something that most people hate to do, which is actually look at numbers, long, boring, empirical work. But I take one for the team in this book, and I do go to the numbers. And I don't just track down someone some obscure person who says that it's all going to be great. I try to track down the highest prestige, neutral, boring, empirical people who I don't like reading them, but I do consider them to be the most trustworthy people. Whenever you're looking for numerical work, you don't want to go to someone who's waving flags and is full of passion. You want to go to bean counters. Sure. And so I did go to the bean counters, and the highest quality bean counting on the fiscal effects of immigration. There's a recent report from the National Academy of Sciences where they went over this very carefully. And first punchline, when you go and look at all the taxes that immigrants pay, minus all the taxes or minus all the services they consume, averaged over a long period of time to take into account the fact that immigrants have kids and kids go to school and the kids grow up and they get jobs, all that kind of stuff. The immigration the U.S. has right now is a net fiscal positive. That means that immigration is actually reducing the burden on taxpayers right now, even though we have a welfare state. How can that be? Because the taxes that they pay more than pay for whatever services they're using. And again, everyone are like, well, how in the world can that be? How could that be? Especially for immigrants that are earning less than the median income. And the answer is that government finances are complicated, but here are a couple of features that help tip the scales in favor of immigration. So one of them is that a lot of government spending is what economists call non-rival. This means that the cost doesn't depend on the population. So whatever your views on foreign policy, I trust that if we had a big baby boom in America, we had 30 million new babies, no one would say, well, now that we got 30 million new babies, we now need to have a lot more nuclear weapons to protect the babies. Right? Whatever you think about military policy, it doesn't matter. Still, it's like, well, look, we can defend those new babies just as well with what we had as the population we had before. Right? And there's a lot of things the government does that are like this, where the cost either doesn't depend on population at all, or at least it rises much less than proportionately. Another good example is national debt, where whenever countries talk about secession, the question is always, how do we divide up the national debt? Mm-hmm. And if you could secede while leaving behind your share of the national debt, secession is awesome. If Scotland could get out of England without paying a pound of the British national debt, this would be a fantastic deal for everyone in Scotland, but of course a terrible deal for the people left behind who are left with a much higher per capita debt burden. Immigration is basically secession in reverse. You get new people who forget about the country, the national debt of the country they came from, and then become responsible for the national debt of the country that they're in. And again, essentially a lot of this is like letting someone in for reduced price at a matinee, right? Do movie theaters lose money because the tickets to the matinee are below average? No, because the cost of letting people into the movie theater barely depends upon the number of people that are in there, and so it's just really free money. So anyway, that's only, of course, now not all government services are like that, but some of them are. And that means that when you go and do the math, you can get people who are paying a lot less in taxes than the median person, but still are a net fiscal positive. Then, of course, you want to go and break it down by the kind of immigrant, because yes, it's true that the immigrants that we're getting right now on average are a net benefit for U.S. taxpayers. But right now, the ones that we let in tend to actually be higher earning because it's easier for high-skilled people to get in than low-skilled people. So there, what I say is when you crunch the numbers, that even low-skilled immigrants are a net positive as long as they're young. As long as they're young. If they're low-skilled and old, then they do become a bad deal for U.S. taxpayers, right? Which then you could lead to two reactions. One of them is, fine, we'll let everyone in except low-skilled elderly people. Another, well, so that's one, which would still be a big improvement over the status quo as far as I'm concerned. Another reaction you could have is to say, well, given that this is overall a big positive, the hysteria and hyperbole of saying we can't do this is just wrong. And furthermore, the principle of free migration is so important that it's not the kind of thing that you should break the principle just because there's a minority of people where it's not working out. Just like the fact that you have Satanists is not a good reason to go and back out on freedom of religion and say, look, yes, there's a few people, I don't see any social value in this religion, but this principle of freedom is important enough that we should respect their freedom anyway, because, and especially it's just not that big of a burden. How often have you ever had your life messed up by Satanists? Right? I guess, I once did have one who came to one of my birthday parties unannounced and did kind of mess things up. But other than that, the Satanists have done nothing to me, so let them be free.
The analogy I always make, we're from Columbia, Tennessee, which is about a 40-minute drive from Pulaski, Tennessee, which was the birthplace of the Ku Klux Klan. And I'm just here to happily report to the rest of the country, as someone who is so close to ground zero of the KKK, I can actually tell you I've never once seen a white hooded person walking down the street ever in my life.
Yeah, that's right. Oh yeah, and then finally one other thing, maybe we'll talk about it more as we go on, but the other obvious reaction, if you really are worried about this fiscal burden of immigrants, how about restricting welfare rather than immigration? Mm-hmm. So, there's this line from Alex and Ross to Cato where he said, let's build a wall around the welfare state rather than around the country. And there's a lot of wisdom to this. And really the only argument I've heard against it is that, well, that sounds good in theory, but we could never do it. And what I say in the book is actually not only can we do it, but it's being done. There's already a lot of restrictions against immigrants getting government benefits. It can be done because it is being done. And if you would just take all of the energy that people are putting into just opposing immigration in general and pour all of that passion into doing something worthwhile of saying, look, we're happy to have immigrants, but we aren't happy to have them be a burden on natives. Let's go and try to restrict their access to benefits rather than the human beings themselves. I think you could probably get considerable movement in that direction, but it does require that you redirect your efforts towards something that is actually easier to do. It's a lot easier to go and change some rules about eligibility for welfare than to change the whole immigration policy, which has basically been constant for the last 50 years.
So I want to backtrack just a tad here to another one of the big objections, and I promise you I'm not just trying to pick on right wingers. It's just I think it's with different topics. Sometimes they'll generally be geared more towards the left or more towards the right. Mm-hmm. But I think one of the objections you'll get from all the Trump fans up and down the street here in Tennessee is, well, we can't have open borders because I'm looking at the polling data and I'm led to believe that all the new immigrants, all the minorities are all going to vote for left-wing politicians, and we're trying to own the libs around here, Bryan. So we can't have open borders because then all the Democrats are going to win all the elections.
Right. So these days it is genuinely true that immigrants are heavily voting Democratic. Mm-hmm. One thing to know is this was not always true. So under Reagan did about as well with immigrants as he did with natives. So there's something that has changed in recent years. Now, as to what that thing would be, I think most people's the conclusion that especially Republicans will leap to is that immigrants are now very left-wing, whereas they were not in the past, and that's why they're voting Democratic. But here's the striking thing. You can go and look at immigrants who seem like they should totally be Republicans, and most obviously Indian Americans. Not American Indians, but Indians from India. So Indian Americans are now the richest ethnicity in America. Mm-hmm. All right, you think that would make them vote Republican? And they're also probably the most socially conservative ethnicity in America. Right? Their rate of kids growing up with two married parents is through the roof. Right, much higher than native-born white Americans, for example, and so you put this together: rich, socially conservative. Sure, seems like they should be Republican, but they're not. So Indian Americans are also 80% Democratic, which I think should make you think maybe it's not that much about the issues at all, and rather it has a lot more to do with whether or not Republicans make them feel welcome and appreciated. Right, so that is my view. So I know a lot of people don't like that idea. And again, so what is so objectionable to this idea that you can win people over by showing some respect and appreciation for them? It fits common sense, right? And furthermore, it has been done before because, another big demographic that used to almost never vote Republican in America? Catholics. Yeah. Catholics were very staunchly Democratic for about a century. And then something changed. Partly it was, of course, that the Democrats changed their issue views and made abortion especially a really big issue. Mm-hmm. But a lot of it was that there was a change in attitude and Republicans started making Catholics feel very welcome because they realized they had an opportunity. Right? And I say this is what any far-sighted Republican would be doing right now is saying, look, the foreign-born population is going to keep growing probably. And we can either just face an inevitable future of irrelevance or only being in power in Idaho, or we can get with the times and realize that we've got new customers and we need to go and win them over and think about ways that you can take your traditional Republican message and sell it to a new audience. Right. And, so the example in my mind right now, if I were any kind of long run political strategist for the Republicans, I would say my number one issue right now is getting every Venezuelan in America. We want you. You are victims of a horrible socialist tyranny. Sure. We love you. We care about you. We want you here. We want to have another group like Cubans. Right? We want to have another Hispanic group that appreciates us. We want to elect Venezuelans to the Venezuelan Republicans to this Congress to go and denounce socialism before the whole country. We want people to be there saying, like you think it's very cute to talk about socialism. I tell you, I lived under. There's nothing cute about seeing a country go down the drain, as I did with my own eyes. Mm-hmm. Right. So to see Venezuelan Republicans getting elected, if you let in 10 million refugees from Venezuela, it's totally doable. And if you did it in the right way, where, again, if Trump had made this his issue from the very beginning, I think that you could have transformed this entire group into ardent Republicans just by taking their side and caring about them and not only listening to them, but also trying to give them the bigger picture. Because, you have a lot of people from Venezuela who've never known anything other than socialism. And then you say, well, do you know why America is so much better than Venezuela? Because we're the opposite, right? You can sell that. And then, besides the Venezuelans, I'd be trying to get all the Uyghur refugees out of Western China. Yes. Saying, look, here we have people being put into slave labor camps. And you know what? America does not go for that. we take a stand for this, but not just a cheap talk stand of saying bad, 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 but the real stand of saying, if you don't want them, we do. We see valuable human beings here. We see the oppressed of all nations, and America is their home, right? I mean, these are the kinds of things which, if you were doing, you would be transforming the Republican Party for the better, building up new voters, and also, holding up these ideals that people like Reagan were so articulate in defending.
Now, I know this is what I'm afraid you're going to hear, though, is now Nashville's just north of us, and I'm hearing tons of Nashvillians complaining today. They're not complaining about Venezuelans. They're complaining about people from other states of the United States. They'll say, well, look at all the people leaving California. They're leaving California. A lot of them are moving to a state like Tennessee. They're moving to a budding city like Nashville. And you're seeing a culture change. You're seeing a change in demographics. You're seeing a little bit of a change in voting. So I think those people are terrified that, well, is relocating Venezuelans going to be like that concept to the umpteenth degree? Right.
So one other thing to keep in mind here is there's a lot of data on immigrant voting, and one thing to keep in mind here is there's a lot of data on immigrant voting, and one big pattern is immigrants just have low turnout. So I'd be a lot more worried about the Californians. So in addition, of course, immigrants are much less likely to even have an opinion. Right, sure. They just show up and like, what's going on here? So, more persuadable for sure. Like if I could either go and try to win over a group of new Venezuelan immigrants to my cause, or a bunch of California immigrants to Tennessee, I'd way rather be and talk to those Venezuelans. They don't have their minds made up in the same way, so that's better. But they do have lower turnout. But then again, that's what makes people who are already acculturated to the U.S. If they disagree with you, they're less persuadable. They're more interested in participating. And then furthermore, actually, the immigrants that have the views that I find most objectionable, like the most economically liberal and socially conservative immigrants, are actually the ones that have the lowest rates of voter turnout. So in particular. So low-skilled immigrants are the ones that are the most economically liberal and socially conservative, which in a way does make me nervous because they're the ones that have the hardest time getting here. But they hardly ever vote, even when they're allowed to do so. So, again, that's a reason why I just wouldn't be too worried about it. Again, it's a concern, but a lot of what I try to do in my book is to go and sort out the concerns that are totally bogus from the ones that are mostly bogus, from the ones where there's something to them. Mm-hmm. But I still say, when you consider all of the gains as well as just the horrible, horrible attack on human freedom that immigration restrictions represent. I just imagine, how would you feel if someone said you're not allowed to leave Haiti? Right? Sure. It's not a minor inconvenience, right? So one of my favorite questions is, if you'd either be in jail in America for X years, or you could be stuck in Haiti for life, what value of X makes you indifferent?
Wow.
Yes. So, 3 years, 3 years in prison or life in Haiti. Which one do you want? I think most people would say I'd rather do 3 years in prison. 5 years, 7. Yeah. So my co-author is a web cartoonist, so I've told him he actually could make it in Haiti. He'd just go and get an internet connection and could keep doing what he does. Mm-hmm. So he wouldn't really need to change his job, and he'd have a really low cost of living there. But for most people, though, it really meant, like being stuck in Haiti would be devastating.
Now, there's a couple more topics that I wanted to hit on before we moved on to any of your of their other works, and I hope we have a few minutes to talk a little bit of Game of Thrones before we wrap up here.
Yeah, totally. All right.
But before,
wow,
yeah, I know
someone's giving me the soapbox for the most important issue in the world.
Absolutely. Well. But before we get to that, I'll give you a quick preview of where I stand. So first of all, yes, the Game of Thrones television series ended, in my opinion, a 2 of 10. I give it a very low rating, but I will say I'm a book reader, and at this point, I'm totally on the hype train for Winds of Winter, and I've completely forgotten there even was a television.
All right.
But
we'll come back to that.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. So I wanted to talk a little bit about something we had mentioned before the show, which is the bordertarians. Now, when I say bordertarians, I'm talking about libertarians or ANCAPs or voluntarists, people that are closer or at least within the realm of possibility of home in our ideological or principled community, or they identify more with us than they would say like mainstream Democrat, mainstream Republican. Mm-hmm. But it seems to me that the borders issue is one of those that still drives a pretty big wedge between people that otherwise agree on 90% of issues. So the first I want to ask you before I give you my thoughts. Why do you think that borders is one of those issues that keeps people that otherwise agree? Oh, we want to limit government / demolish the state. I believe in liberty. I believe in non-aggression. How does borders keep those people apart from agreeing with one another?
Right. So here's the truth about human beings. Nationalism comes from the heart, and libertarianism comes from the head, and the heart's stronger than the head for almost all humans. Right. So someone may explicitly say, "Oh, I'm a libertarian," or "I'm a socialist," or whatever. But push comes to shove, if nationalism becomes if nationalism is on the line, then most people will just be nationalists. The most infamous example of this is in World War I. You had the Social Democratic Party of Germany. Officially, it's an internationalist Marxist party, and yet the Kaiser comes to them and says, "So we really need to get a lot of money to go and attack France and Russia. Can we count on your support for that?" And what do the German Social Democrats say? Do they say, "Nein, we cannot do that because Karl Marx said that the working men of our country are our brothers"? Instead, they say, "Jawohl, let's go and kick some French and Russian." That's what they said, and that really captures what human beings are like. You can have a whole ideology saying that liberty is the most important thing, or socialist internationalism the most important thing, but that's not how people really feel. Right? What people really feel like is my country right or wrong, and it takes a lot of mental willpower to not do that. So I think that's the honest answer. There are of course people like Hans Hermann Hoppe who say they've worked it all out, and actually libertarian theory not only allows for borders but requires borders, that kind of thing. And for that, I just say this is one of the craziest stories I've ever heard, a ridiculous rationalization. Because, if you really accept, well, it's our country and our rules apply here, then you shouldn't be a libertarian. Because you say, well, people aren't allowed to move in my house without my consent, so they shouldn't be allowed to move into America without Americans' consent. Say, well, you know what else you can't do in my house? You can't have a church I disagree with. You can't go and say things I disagree with. You can't open a store in my house. So by the same logic, you would have to say that if Americans don't want to let people open up a store or practice a religion or speak their minds, then that's well within their rights. And it's actually the person who goes and opens up an illegal church in Saudi Arabia, that they're the ones who are aggressing against the people of Saudi Arabia, who have a right to run their own country the way they see fit. Right? So that's, I call that, anarcho-statism, where somehow you start with anarchism and end with whatever the government says goes, which, is really crazy to, if you, no one has actually bitten that bullet, but it is the bullet you'd have to bite to say that government should be able to control immigration. So, and then I think on top of that, people are just very inclined to forget about the harm they're inflicting on foreigners, right? So, there's just a lot of excuses to get around this obvious fact that trapping someone in Haiti is as bad as putting them in jail for many years.
Sure.
Right? And just say, well, it's their own fault because they voted for those policies. Like, well, did you vote for America's policies? No. What makes you think that Haitians voted for Haiti's policies? Right? Probably most people in Haiti are hate their government and think it's terrible, and they want to get out. And and if you think that you're not responsible for whatever Trump or Obama does, why are you holding Haitians responsible for what their government does? I've got no idea. But this is a case where people really do have a strong urge to blame the victim and say somehow someone who is born on the wrong side of a border and lives in misery under government oppression, still ultimately they're getting what they deserve. And that's if you can talk yourself into that, you can talk yourself into anything.
I just want to say I've enjoyed this interview so far, but now that we're doing German impressions and throwing down the gauntlet on Hans Hermann Hoppe, we've reached a different level of this interview. So I'm really happy. So,
all right, great, yes.
So let me. You're an economist, and I know that the economist's favorite question is compared to what.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm sure that you would agree that open borders compared to what the United States immigration policy right now is far better. But I'm sure, but I know that you would admit that, well, from a practical standpoint, from a current political climate, there's somewhere around a 0% chance that we're going to get that initiative on the ballot next year, and it's going to pass.
Yep.
So give me some ideas of some things that you think would at least be more politically palatable, that would be better than today.
Yeah, so starting with things that are most politically palatable, just filling the refugee quota with anti-communist people. Right. So, yeah. So, I mean, right now the amount of refugees being let in is extremely low, right? But the U.S. has not. I think the U.S. has a quota of about 200,000 a year. The U.S. has not filled that quota in a long time, right? So I think Obama might have filled it 1 year. I'm blanking on that. But anyway, so let in Venezuelans, let in Uyghurs, let in people who are victims of socialist tyranny. So I think as long as Trump's in power, I think that's one that if he wanted to sell, he could sell it. If you were just to say, look, there's obviously we don't want to let in the bad ones, but these are not bad people. These are the people who are standing up to corrupt socialist regimes. I think if he actually could pull that off. I don't think. Never mind that he could actually. I think he really can just do it with a stroke of a pen. That's one thing that's within the president's discretion. In terms of other things that would be easy to do, issuing more H-1B visas, that kind of thing. So these are very mild things that are still doable, right? So and then also like student visas. So there's been there's been increased scrutiny for students, as far as I can tell, for no good reason at all. A lot of it is just petty persecution, like if the student comes into the school, then they can't go home for the holidays because they have to worry that they'll get stopped at the border and then they'll waste the whole semester. Just like really idiotic stuff like that, just to turn that down to zero. So these are all things that can be done with a stroke of a pen. In terms of more realistic reforms that could actually pass, so there's of course just like increasing the numbers, like turning up the dial a bit. Things that could actually pass in legislation. So, it's like saying any foreigner who gets a U.S. bachelor's degree is allowed to stay. I think that could be doable. Again, especially in a Nixon goes to China kind of moment where the Republicans back it. I think that's actually more likely. Also, one where you have a piece of legislation where you simultaneously raise quotas but restrict welfare. Something like that, where you say, look, there's this lie that we're against immigration, but we love immigration. We just are concerned that Americans should not be burdened by people that are going to be freeloaders and take advantage of our system. So this is a piece of legislation that captures both our appreciation for immigrants, but also our concern that immigrants should be self-supporting and should be ready to hit the ground running. So that's something else that I think, again, with the right backing and the right framing, I think is doable, right? I mean, just to get an idea about how immigration law has worked in the past. So right now there's this 1965 Immigration Act, which did greatly deregulate immigration. It's why the foreign-born share of the U.S. has risen so much, but it was not intended to do so. Right. So the reason, what really happened was that the U.S. wanted to get rid of explicit national quotas because in the middle of the 60s, they're really worried about seeming racist. Sure. All right. So, but at the same time, they did not want to have a lot more immigrants, and they definitely didn't want to have a lot more non-white immigrants. Right. So how can we change the law so the law itself is not racist, but the policy remains racist? Was essentially what it came down to, and they hit upon an idea. Family reunification will do the job. They said, well, right now, families, everybody loves families. There's something racist about families, is there? And right now, almost all the immigrants in the U.S. who would have families abroad are white. So if we just go and put it in basis of family, then America will stay white. But we no longer have to have any indication on the books that's what we're trying to do. And that worked for a couple of years. But then the new laws allowed a few non-whites to get in. And then here's the thing. People from third world countries were a lot more interested in bringing their families over than people from European countries. And people from non-European countries were a lot more interested in coming to join their families here than people from European countries. So family reunification gradually led to more and more non-whites coming here, right? And And that then again snowballed, where once you're here and you're a citizen, then you can bring in more people and you can bring in more people. And particularly the definition of the family was one where it included adult brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
And once you do that, then you allow for your adult brothers and sisters to bring their spouses. And once they bring their spouses, they can bring their brothers and sisters, and so on and so on. So yeah, I remember there's a great story about one Nigerian doctor who has indirectly caused the migration of 150 Nigerians. Right now,
Yeah.
Here's the interesting thing. This was not intended at all by the people that wrote the legislation. They just screwed up royally from their own point of view. And yet we have not changed immigration law since. Even Trump failed to do it. He made a couple of efforts, half-hearted, I would say, and just purely organized. So, if I really believe what Trump said, I would have, on the day of my inauguration, say, the one thing I'm going to do in my office, if I do anything, is to go and rewrite the U.S. immigration law. And maybe he still would have failed, and it would have been embarrassing, but that would have clearly been his best chance to do it, right? And he just got distracted and worked on a bunch of different things, and like his only legislative accomplishment now is a reduction in taxes. So he's done a bunch of bad things, but all by executive order, which can then change as soon as other executive goes and changes them.
Now, I want to change gears here a little bit. I was reading Open Borders, and I was admiring all the artwork by Zach Weinersmith. So I was a little bit familiar with Zach before I read Open Borders, so that when I got Open Borders, I recognized the art style. And I thought, no way, it's that. It was one of those things where I immediately went on Google and I was like, holy crap, it's that guy. It's that guy whose comics I've seen and I've really enjoyed. But when I was reading it, there was a couple of things that popped out to me. So from a material standpoint, I felt like the myth of the rational voter in the case of against education, some of the same material, some of the same thought process was felt and known. Like I could tell this was a Bryan Caplan work because you could. So not only could you philosophically see it and feel it, but in certain pages of the book you could literally see the rational voter because it's actually depicted in the artwork. So I want to start back from the beginning chronologically and work our way forward a little bit. So I want to start with the myth of the rational voter. Now, my good friend Mike Meharry is the National Communications Director for the 10th Amendment Center. One of my favorite quotes he's ever given is, a lot of people are afraid of open borders because they think you're gonna bring in a bunch of commies, right? You're gonna bring in a bunch of socialists. They're all gonna come in. They're gonna get on welfare and they're gonna vote for terrible things. And my favorite quote from Mike is that all of you people that are worried about immigrants coming in and doing those things are ignoring that your lily white neighbors have been voting for socialist policies for 100 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so of course you could still say that's true, but the immigrants would be even worse than they are. But
oh, of course,
yes, and I will say, so I've done data work on this, and so it is true that that if you just compare foreign-born Americans to native-born Americans, that that foreign-born are a little bit more economically liberal and a little bit more socially conservative. Mm-hmm. So my joke is that they would be great Trump voters if only they were native born, but it can be that native born Americans are terrible, but immigrants are worse. Mm-hmm. But what I want to say is, well, let's just look at it quantitatively. All right, so it's not enough to say they're worse. How much worse? And that's where I say it's just a very marginal difference. Mm-hmm. So it'd be one thing to say we don't want to let in 200 million Stalinists who are going to destroy us. And I could understand that and say, yeah, all right, well, I guess if it's that bad, but then the question is, but is it that bad?
Yeah.
How bad, is it really true? And that's where people generally just rely upon emotion and hyperbole and just worst case thinking. And that is exactly what I am against across the board. Look, don't tell me what you have imagined could happen. Let's go and look at the facts and see what is actually likely to happen. And I just don't see anything remotely like that in the cards.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's one of the things I love about open borders is that it sort of ties a lot of these arguments together. So if you're looking at the rational voter argument and say that, well, I know that there's a section of your book where you talk about that as on net, in general, a lot of immigrants' views on a lot of major policy is actually really not that far off from the generic Americans' views on major policy. But furthermore, getting back to the rational voter side of things, that if let's say you're an anarchist or a minarchist, or you believe in limited government and constitutionalism and all those good things, we've been, I think it's fair to say, we've been drifting slightly off course. If you believe in limiting government and reduced spending and balanced budgets and all those good things, we've been off that path for decades and decades and decades. So why is it fair to keep out immigrants because we're blaming them for that eventuality when we already have that eventuality with native-born voters right now?
Yeah. So I mean, just the perceived appropriateness of the punishment varies so tremendously for natives versus foreigners. For natives, then maybe you don't invite them to Thanksgiving. And for foreigners, the right punishment is they have to remain trapped in Venezuela seeing their kid die of malnourishment, when they could just get on a boat and come here and make a new life for themselves. Yeah, so it is one where people are just much more willing to go and do horrible things with very little reason to foreigners than to natives. And I do try to get people to think about that more. At the same time, I don't want to just say that, there's no basis for the fears at all, but rather just say, look, the fears are just greatly overstated. And the other thing, of course, is, is there anything that we could do other than saying Venezuelans can't come here to avoid these problems if you really are right to think that they're serious problems? And obviously there are, just things like increasing the amount of time it takes for naturalization. So right now you don't get to naturalize immediately. Right, it's a hard, drawn-out bureaucratic process, so that could be harder. Right, and again, if you just take whatever anger you feel against immigrants in general, whatever political energy you're putting into just trying to change fundamental immigration law and keep them out, if you could then go and say, no, I'm not against them, I'm just against certain bad things that happen. Let's go and get narrower laws and target a lot of energy on something that people don't feel strongly about. And you're a lot more likely to actually get your way, and then also to do some good for once, instead of just going and immiserating a bunch of innocent people.
Now, I agree with what you said, but I'm going to add one addendum. I'm not sure it's just immigrants, because I'm a native-born Tennessean, and I'm told on a regular basis that if I don't like it, I should move to Somalia. And I don't want to. And I don't want to live in Somalia as opposed to be in prison in the United States for 3 to 5 years.
I mean, of course, normally that's a joke. In that, if there were a law being passed saying should we go and send, send anyone associated with the gold standard to Somalia, right? I don't think that would pass, right? So it's more of a taunt than a serious policy proposal. But yeah,
sure. Okay, and I want to fast forward a little bit. The Case Against Education, which is easily one of my top 3 favorite nonfiction. Easily one of my favorite top 3 nonfiction. Now, I want to preface this by saying, so I'm one of those guys that has one of those useless history degrees. So that's me. But I want to say that even though that applies to me, and it's easy for me to be bitter and say, well, wait a minute, I should have a higher place in society because I have this degree. And well, it's not, no one likes to be told that something they got was unwise or useless or not cost benefit wise as good of a deal, because the selfish person is thinking, well, but I love history, Bryan, and I want to do what I love. I'm not supposed to work a day in my life and all that. So I know that you can go way greater in depth about some of those things that I just brought up, but I want to start off right off the bat by just telling the really quick anecdote that as someone who went to school, got a history degree, and by proxy of having done that, having commensurated and been around some other peers that were either in similar degree fields or also getting history degrees, I have to tell you, I think I believe you that. I believe in the signaling model. I believe in credential, or I'm worried about credential inflation, because I have to tell you, I was in a class not 2 years ago where the writing prompt for the class was, let's talk about something that's happened since the 19th century that affected, since the 19th century, so 1800s, that affected American history in some such way. Out of 15 respondents, at least 5 of them wrote about the American Revolution. and in another prompt of these same 15 to 20 some odd students in a class, they were told to write about the modern war era of the World Wars. So World War I, World War II. Multiple respondents wrote about the American Civil War as something that took place within a decade of World War I and World War II. So I got to tell you, Bryan,
majors? Are these majors?
These were, I'll put it to you this way. These were people that were in 300 level history class. So I don't know why they were taking 300 level history classes unless they were history or poli-sci majors. But either way, that gives me serious concerns about the future of America.
Right. Well, the good news is there's no sign it's ever been any better. So, like there's public opinion work going back to the 30s, and just knowledge of the public of government history has always been really low. And so you read my book, so you know the basic deal that even if people learn something in school, which they often, of course, don't, but even if they do, people forget things they don't use, and so people just don't use history or civics very often. And therefore, even if they ever learned it, it just slips from their mind. But of course, also people just find this stuff very boring. So the share, like attendance in college classes is very low, of course. Right. Now, like the main thing is, if you enjoy it, then that's great. Although the good news is, I say, if the reason why you want to study this stuff is that you enjoy it, I have good news for you. You don't have to pay tuition anymore. Just go and attend classes for free, and almost no professor would ever stop someone who just wants to sit in and learn the material. The thing that you are paying for really is the certification, stamp that you were here. I bet that actually, if you were to go and talk to most history professors and say, I'm not really a student here, but I really love the subject, and would you still grade my work and everything? I bet you could even get that out of them, because it's so unusual to get a curious student. And professors normally do like their subjects, so to have someone in their class that actually finds it worthwhile is a rare treat. So but it's as I say in my book, I love students who actually like learning. I wish I had a lot more of them, but this is a pretty lame rationalization for continued taxpayer system of the system. So it says taxpayer support for the system we have, given that hardly anyone fits that description.
Sure. Well, I have to tell you, one of my favorite lines from the book that I've used in groups, I was once telling a room of people about the case against education, and these are people that are generally open to the idea that government doesn't exactly do things perfectly. Mm-hmm. They're generally open to the idea that taxation's theft. I shouldn't be getting robbed to pay for X, Y, and Z programs. But they're also very sympathetic to, if we're going to start banning things, let's not start with education, right? That's not going to win us a lot of voters. It's not a practical policy position. But
right, well, I'm not saying banning. I'm just saying cut spending.
Yeah, cut spending.
Yes.
But with that said, to this same group of people, I posed to them the question that you posed, which is, which would you rather have? 4 years of Princeton education but no diploma, or a Princeton diploma and no 4 years of education? And I can confidently tell you, even with a room with educators in it, it was unanimous. They want that diploma.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, what I always say is, I'm not totally sure on what the answer is right, but if you have to think about it, you agree with me that signaling is really important.
Yes.
And at least a lot of the motivation is credentialist. So if possible, I always try to dial things down to something that I think almost anyone could accept. Sounds like your room. People are willing to accept the hard version, but just to say, look, even if you think that that you would rather have that education, but still, it's not an easy call. Yeah. And that shows us that this credentialist motive is extremely important. In terms of political acceptability, what I would say is abolishing things is, of course, really hard, even for the dumbest programs you can think of. Even for like the Strategic Mohair Reserve or something like that, it's going to be hard to abolish that. But just to go and say, well, how about we just cut spending for the mohair? Mm-hmm. How about we just do that? Just dial that down. Just hold the line at nominal spending and let inflation gradually make the program irrelevant. I think that is doable. I mean, right now in the U.S., in terms of political feasibility, I think that going and demagoguing social justice warriors on campus in order to justify cutting their spending is doable.
Sure. Right?
I don't know that would win. And again, the problem is that Republicans send their kids to college too, and have a lot of and they probably have overall a lot more affection for the colleges than they have resentment against them, despite everything. Yeah. So. When someone goes, when a Republican goes and walks around the campus of UVA today, probably their main thought is, it was so great how when I was here and a beautiful college, and then they may read a story about some crazy professor who made all the white men sit in the corner in a cage or something like that. Yeah. It's like, that's terrible. That makes me so mad. But the anger is not enough to make them say, let's go and cut the spending for that. But I still think that it could be done. You could take advantage of all this resentment for how crazy the professoriate is to say that's it, or I mean, here's one that I think would probably be easier to say: we're slashing spending for social sciences and the humanities, and maybe we'll go and move it over to STEM, something useful,
Sure.
right? And just say social science, humanities, those would be great if they were really teaching the great books and teaching people how to think, which are pretty mythical anyway. But in terms of demagoguery, this could work. And say, but like now it's just been hijacked by a bunch of terrible left-wing ideologues who are corrupting our children and making them hate America. No. What American colleges need is more STEM, more science, technology, engineering, math. And I think that could be done in Republican states.
Now, something that's always been curious to me, we touched a little bit about open borders, of how people feel versus how policy tends to shake out. And this definitely is reflected in education. As you mentioned in the book that, practically all adults in the United States have had personal experience of several years in the education system in the United States. And I mean, you can practically grab almost any random person on the street and say, hey, let's talk about your schooling years. And they're going to have maybe they have good memories of friends and hanging out and parties and a good time. But when it comes to the classroom and the schoolwork, they're going to have bad memories. They hate, it was boring. They hated the homework. It was just generally drudgery. I didn't use any of that stuff in real life, yada, yada, yada. And I agree with all those things are true. But so what's the disconnect between people, the public at large saying, yeah, I hated school, it was boring and it sucked and my job has nothing to do with it, and yet there's not a voting block to cut education spending?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in the case against education, I talk about the psychological concept that I would most like to see people talk about, but it hardly ever, economists don't talk about it, regular people don't talk about it. And the concept is called social desirability bias.
Yes.
It's a fancy phrase for a simple idea. And the simple idea is that when the truth sounds bad, people lie. And if they lie enough, they start to believe the lie. And so people believe a lot of nonsense that sounds good because they just aren't going and putting on their thinking caps and really weighing whether it makes sense. Right? And what I say is that politics is governed by social desirability bias. If you have a lot of firsthand experience, which is very negative towards something that sounds good, people just don't connect it to politics. And when you ask them about the political issue, then it's back to high-minded platitudes. So the kind of stuff of, nothing is more important than our children's education. And I always say, nothing? How about food? Isn't food more important? Right? And people may say, oh, well, that's not what I meant. Like, well, that's what you said. And I think you kind of did mean it at the time. It's just that you're saying things without really thinking about them. And I think it'd be better if people thought about things before they said them and weighed really how accurate they were. Or, typical things with, I believe that if we really try, we can give every American child a first-rate education. It's like, have you investigated whether this is true? Have you ever taught a class and seen how hard it is for one dedicated person to give each child in the class a really good education, much less to do it for a whole country? Doesn't this just sound like a lot of wishful thinking? Right? And yet, here's the problem, is that politics really is very much governed by social desirability bias. Listen to the speech of almost any politician. Truth, the idea that there are hard facts that people don't want to face is very, very rarely comes up. Instead, what you want to say is just a bunch of feel-good nonsense for your audience. Now, of course, sometimes the feel-good nonsense is blaming everything on their enemies, but that, again, is another kind of feel-good nonsense. It here's good to hear that everything wrong in the world is caused by your enemies rather than a multitude of factors. And just imagine someone saying, well, I've been really crunching the numbers, and I've decided that 1/3 of all problems in America are caused by our enemies. And then another 50% are just intrinsic problems with the modern world. And then the remaining problems are caused by us. So we cause a lot fewer problems than the other side. But when I've done the math, turns out there's a number of problems that we're to blame for. Right? That is not something you're ever going to go and tell the national convention of your party. Ever.
Yeah.
Right. Or one that I particularly love is, imagine a president coming and saying, all right, I've decided that we need to go and invade this country. And here's why. I've determined there's a 50% chance this war will make things better, 30% chance it will make no difference, 20% chance that it will make things worse. I like those odds. Let's do it. Yeah. Right? No politician would ever say that, even though that is the most honest case for a war that I've ever heard made.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. Now, I know that we're getting pretty close to time here, so we've got to shift to focus to things that really matter And what really matters is season 8 of Game of Thrones sucked.
Yes.
But here's the problem with season 8 of Game of Thrones sucking is that if they sat down you and I in a room and said, all right, we're gonna do a rewrite, we're gonna do some reshoots, and we're gonna fix this, it would be really hard to fix season 8 without going to season 7. It would be really hard to fix season 7 without going to season 6. So then the question then becomes, how far back do you have to go to right the ship so you don't wind up with a season 8 that we got? And I know I've seen you make some comments, specifically more from a book standpoint, that you would say, now I think you would agree with me that in general, George R.R. Martin is a better writer and a better curator of the world of Ice and Fire than D&D, the people that ran the show. And so you would generally err towards his opinion on how things should go. But you wouldn't necessarily say he's written a perfect story start to finish.
Right. I would actually say I'm totally disillusioned with George R. R. Martin at this point. I think that he's done 20. He's been on the wrong course for 20 years. So he wrote 3 fantastic books.
Okay.
First 3 ones, a Game of Thrones, Clash of Kings, Storm of Swords. Those are all solid, and those are, of course, very closely followed in the first 4 seasons of the show.
Yes.
Right. So first season's first book, second season second book. Seasons 3 and 4 are Storm of Swords, which I, like most people, I consider the very best book.
Sure.
And then I think that for the last 2 books, George R. R. Martin completely lost the plot. And book 4, there's a reason why the show writers use virtually nothing from book 4. A Feast for Crows, which is it just wanders around and is just incoherent, and hardly anything happens, and a bunch of dead ends that the audience knows are dead ends. So that's not much of a story. And then book 5 I thought improved a little bit, but again, just it's just so poorly plotted and so little happens. So I've got a whole story that really, Martin is to blame for the problems with the shows, because as long as they had good source material, they did good seasons.
Sure.
And the problem started once the source material was no longer very good. And then of course, they had the seasons that are based upon the bad books, and then finally the seasons that are, I guess, based upon his plot sketches, which apparently are very shaky indeed. So anyway, I just would have gone and stop, go all the way back to book 3 and then rewrite the remaining books from scratch. Which if he would go and write it at his earlier pace. There's no reason for the books to be as long as books 4 and 5 were, right? I think, but just to, I think, so as a writer, I'll say that one of the worst things for writing in a timely manner is having poor organization. So if your organization is poor, then you're either writer's block, or you just wander around talking and not getting anywhere. So I just think that he had a very bad plot structure. And again, my guess is that the problem is he became too famous and then got surrounded by sycophants who didn't tell him that what he was doing sucked.
Sure.
Right? So,
yeah.
I mean, that's my guess. I don't know what's going on, but you need to keep people around you who will tell you when what you're doing sucks. I feel very grateful that I've got a bunch of people within a stone's throw of me right now as I speak, who, if I was doing something that really sucked, they would tell me, Bryan, this is terrible. You're off your game. And then I've got a whole story about how I would rewrite the books. But key thing is that in my rewrite, the White Walkers have to break through at the end of book 4.
Sure.
Right. Right. And so, and a lot of people say, well, it's not very interesting because it's the human conflict that's interesting. And I say, yes, I know, but it's the interaction of the human conflict. So basically, my alternate version of A Feast for Crows has the same plot line of Jon Snow being, taking over the Night's Watch and Ramsay Bolton taking over the North. But then in my version, the White Walkers are storming the walls, and Jon Snow is trying to get a coalition of the willing together of wildlings and Northerners and Ramsay Bolton. And Ramsay Bolton will say, do you take me for a fool, Snow? And then finally Ramsay Bolton pretends that he's going to go and take their side, but actually he doesn't even believe that there's any threat. And then he goes and backstabs the Night Watch at the key moment, and the White Walkers get in, and then they kill Ramsay and they devastate the North. And that is your Feast for Crows, is the dead take over the entire North, and that's how my Feast for Crows ends, is with a real Feast for Crows where the entire North is completely devastated and taken over by the dead, and a few beloved characters get away, although some other beloved characters die, because that's the other thing that Martin dropped the ball on, is he stopped killing characters people liked after book 3.
Yes.
Right? He has this reputation, he kills beloved characters. Yeah, but he hasn't done it for 20 years.
Yes. Yeah, it's very true. One of my criticisms, if I'm looking at it purely from a show standpoint, is that you had mentioned the first we'll say 4 seasons of the show are really solid. They line up with the book material that you find favorable, and that general kind of mood amongst the audience of, oh, you got to stay tuned to this show. They could kill anybody. Well, that was only true for a while. That's not really true on the whole.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, like, people start getting resurrected. I'll also say, I mean, I just think that anytime you introduce magic with a resurrection, you really just destroy the dramatic tension of the story. Sure. And also just raise the question, well, why are you resurrecting all these other people? Yes. Why is it only Beric Dondarrion and Jon Snow? How come only they get resurrected? Why can't there be a lot of other people get resurrected? Well, so, I mean, it's what we call, like, overpowered, right? And so, like it takes a story that was, like, really made you feel like the stakes were high, and then it sort of throws everything into doubt and say, well, then couldn't anyone else get resurrected? Like, this is stupid.
So I have a few thoughts to share on that, but I want to just summarize in short. So would you say from the Red Wedding and back is good, but after the Red Wedding, it goes downhill?
No, I like the Purple Wedding too.
Okay, so Purple Wedding then. Purple
so,
Wedding.
I mean, I agree that it's a controversial choice, but it does open up a lot of other possibilities, including for Cersei to be queen. I mean, Joffrey is such a fantastic character, but I do think that it's very much in keeping with the worldview that Joffrey can get killed out of the blue too, and then you're really wondering what's going on. So that's one where you could definitely argue me into saving him, but ultimately, I like that. So, I mean, and again, if you remember that basically Storm of Swords ends with Littlefinger kills Lysa.
Yep.
Right? And I love that. But then, to me, there's only one thing that makes any sense at all after that, and that's Littlefinger's going to force Sansa to marry him and become Lord of the Eyrie, and then kill off her cousin.
Yeah.
Right? And so, I mean, to me, nothing else makes any sense at all.
Okay,
right? He's pining after her mom, and then and he's this this horrible, perverted, Machiavellian figure who like deliberately is creating chaos, for his own ends. And then what I have happening in subsequently in my alternate rewrite is Littlefinger, he's got he's forced Sansa to marry him. She's had his baby. She's stuck there. She's in yet another horrible situation. She doesn't get to have her feminist awakening as in the show, which is so anachronistic and ridiculous. Sure. But anyway, then the key thing, well, then what's Littlefinger's plan? And the big reveal is he thinks that he's got some ancient magic that's going to go and bring the army of the dead under his control. And he's got it all planned out. And you spend all of book 5 is him there going like, I've got this plan. Everything's going to be great. And, and then what happens is they get an undead dragon and he just comes and wipes out the Eyrie and kills Littlefinger and Sansa and their baby, again, killing a beloved character. And that's my rewrite for that.
I like that. I will say really quickly, the way the end of Littlefinger in the show was probably the moment where I said, I'm now done with the show. No matter what happens, I can't come back.
Yes,
that was probably it.
He's such a fantastic character and so clever. And then suddenly at the end, why is he doing any of this? It's incredibly stupid. But again, like based on his whole backstory, it makes no sense that he would want to marry Sansa to Ramsay Bolton. What makes sense is that he would want to go and get to marry the young version of the woman who broke his heart, and then go and take her power and become the guy that everyone said that he could never be because he's just this little nerd. Right? That makes sense.
Sure. Now, I think if I'm being a little bit a more modest scope, and I'm trying to do I'm looking at it from a show standpoint, and I'm looking at season 8, and I'm like, well, I want to make season 8 better, but as a general rule, I don't want to make too many huge changes from what they did or where they started. It's kind of more of I want to have a better ending, but I don't want to go too far back to get there.
Right. Yeah, so, I've got that too.
So with that said, I'll tell you one place that I think you and I have a lot of overlap, which is the Army of the Dead breaks through the wall, and they should rampage pretty dang far south. They shouldn't get to Winterfell and all die. That's ridiculous.
Yeah. Like the dead have to win the Battle of Winterfell. Otherwise, it just ruins the whole build-up. Yep. And then what you need is for there to be some last desperate effort to hold Moat Cailin or something like that. and then you need to bring it, and then you need to take all of the plot threads that seem like they've been going nowhere, like Sam Charlie finding out about using the the dragon glass and and the dragons and everything else, and get Cersei on board at the last minute, just after she betrays him, says, well, now it's really going to come for you, so get everybody, and then you can have one last stand there. Or I think really better would be have the last stand at King's Landing, and this is where Tyrion can get his last great scene, and you can have Tyrion saying you held King's Landing once, the end of Clash of Kings. No other man alive is better. So then you've got the then you got wildfire, you got dragons, you got Sam Charlie's dragon glass, everything coming together, and then you kill off a bunch of beloved characters. So I think you really have to kill Tyrion, you have to kill Sam Charlie, who are all doing their very best here, and that's basically episode 4, and then episode 5 is Cersei tries stabbing everybody in the back. Yeah. After the victory, and then there's one last effort. But then again, I don't think you have Daenerys going crazy or anything like that. That's just, I think that's just, there's some desperate effort to put some foreshadowing in on that, but it's just completely out of character. They build her up for many seasons as being one of the few people actually cares about collateral damage. Sure. So it makes no sense. Her suddenly she went crazy. It's just ridiculous. So but then I would end with the happy ending of Jon Snow and marries Daenerys, and they kill Cersei and take over. Although I could also actually be happy with Cersei's double cross works and she wins the end. That's cool too.
Now, stay with me on this. Let me tell you my just general overview of what I would do as a rewrite of primarily just the end. Now, again, I'm trying to keep big pieces where they are, but rewriting parts that I think made people the most PO'd. So I think one thing that made people PO'd is the whole Mad Queen Daenerys thing. Now, I'll tell you this. I'm going to keep Mad Queen Daenerys, but I'm going to show it's going to make more sense. The second thing is that Cersei's the big bad guy, not the Night King. I'm doing away with that. So the Night King is going to be the main finale, not Cersei. So what I would do is that all the forces are coming from the east. They're coming from Essos. They're landing in Westeros. Jon Snow's meeting with Daenerys. We're going to get the big coalition together to fight the armies of the dead, right? And this is where you first have the big disconnect. Is that, yes, Jon Snow and Daenerys can have puppy eyes for each other and all that. But Daenerys ultimately puts her foot down and says, I don't care what's happening in the north. I will not help you until I'm Queen of Westeros and I'm sitting on the throne in...
Yeah, that's good. Good, I like it.
Yes. So with that, Jon Snow ultimately has to acquiesce to, okay, the only way that we're going to save humanity is to have this army and dragons and all that. So I'm going to have to make the really unpopular decision of knowing that the army of the north, or the army of the dead, is marching south. The north is basically already destroyed. For all intents and purposes, all northern houses and cities and castles as we knew it are gone. They're already in the Riverlands. They're on their way to King's Landing. So from a human toll standpoint, the destruction has been catastrophic, and Jon Snow is, to the chagrin of his northern followers and Riverlands friends, he's still helping Daenerys take over King's Landing as opposed to helping them while they're currently being destroyed. Very good. So this is where you see that the people are against Daenerys, even though she hasn't actually hurt them per se. Not directly.
Well, yes, and monomania makes a lot more sense than homicidal mania.
So basically, we're doing the Battle of King's Landing first. Okay, we're storming King's Landing. We're going to burn ships. Yada yada yada. I'm going to just write out Euron and all the ships and all that stuff, mostly because Euron in the books is so much cooler than Euron in the show. We're going to write that off as dead. So, okay, the Battle of King's Landing. Daenerys doesn't actively decide to burn everyone. It wasn't a conscious decision because she's crazy. It's that she accidentally sets off all the wildfire that her father planted. Yeah. But she's also a prideful ruler, so that when people come to her and say, how dare you, how could you do this, instead of being meek and saying, oh, no, I didn't mean to, I'm so sorry, she says, how dare you question, she takes the prideful stance of, well, it's not my fault, how dare you question me, I'm in charge now. So again, she didn't mean to burn everyone. So the dragon doesn't burn everyone. The dragon doesn't burn everyone, the wildfire does. But, the unintelligent masses don't know the difference. All they know is fire killed my family. She's the fire queen of dragons. It's her fault. So again, it's really more of a misunderstanding than it is she's a crazy queen. But she's willing to wear the mantle because she wants to be queen more than she wants them to appreciate her assaulting King's Landing.
Yeah, I mean, you could even build it up where Tyrion's warning her there could be other reserves of wildfire, and then she just says, "Well, I can't worry about these small risks that you're talking about. You don't have any proof," and then does it and it blows up, and then like, whoa, yeah. So that would be much more in character.
So then with the whole Jon Snow killing Daenerys thing, I'm going to keep that. But again, it's much more of an emotional thing, not emotional as in sad, but emotional as in anger, a crime of passion type of a thing, where he's telling Daenerys, I'm asking you, did you do this, yes or no? And she may come back with I didn't, but what does it matter? What's done is done. I'm the queen now. And out of rage, he kills her.
Yeah, that could be really good.
So then you fast forward to, because again, the show did this terribly, but okay, he's a prisoner. I don't know why the Unsullied wouldn't just kill, in the Dothraki wouldn't just kill him on the spot. They're her blood riders, they're supposed to, but we're going to forget all that. He's in prison. Obviously, the Starks want Jon Snow out of prison. Maybe there's people out there that think he's Azor Ahai, the army of the dead's coming. But of course, again, in typical human fashion, we're ignoring the fact that Riverrun has now been destroyed. The army of the dead is literally right outside the gates. But we're ignoring that because we're having a trial for Jon Snow. but that falls in line with they're not having the right priorities, right? A lot of people were upset that there wasn't some sort of cool fight between Grey Worm and Jon Snow. They sort of built up that antagonism of Grey Worm is loyal to his queen. He doesn't really like this male suitor. So Jon Snow's going to have a trial by combat, which again is something that's been visited in the show. He's going to fight Grey Worm. He's going to kill Grey Worm. But in the process of killing Grey Worm, Jon Snow is going to have the clothes of his upper body torn off. I'm sure all the women that will watch the show will love that because they'll see his abs and his cool hair and all that. But the point being is that after the fight is over and he kills Grey Worm, there's not going to be some eruption of applause or anything. There's going to be two events. The first event is all the people there are going to see all of his stab wounds. And they're going to see, oh my God, this dude was stabbed in the heart and he's alive. Because that's still one of those things where they sort of gloss over. Like the average person would not believe you because that's an unbelievable story. So now you're going to see all the lords and ladies of Westeros who are still trying to decide where do we go from here. And they're seeing this guy who's been billed as this mythical hero come to save us all. But now they actually see living proof of him being no mere mortal. Does that make sense?
Yeah, this is great.
So with that in mind, you hear the horns blasting, the bells ring. What is it? The army of the dead is here to attack King's Landing. So Jon Snow then has to rally the troops and fight off the army of the dead. So ultimately, the army of the dead is defeated at King's Landing. The dragons help fight the army of the dead, even though they don't. It's not Daenerys, but he's a Targaryen, so they generally do what he wants. They generally fight. Again, I'm with you. Tons of people, basically almost everyone of note is dead. That way, instead of me having to go through line by line, just know that a ton of people die, but the army of the dead is ultimately defeated. And the surviving lords of ladies of Westeros decide, well, Jon Snow rallied us all. He won the battle. He saved the world. We saw the proof of him being this magical creature. We're going to declare him king. But remember, Jon, the whole I don't want it, she's my queen, Jon Snow from season 8. He doesn't want to be king. So my ending of the show, because you're always trying to balance it being a really awesome drama that fits the Song of Ice and Fire universe, but you also have to balance in, it has to be entertaining and people have to like it, otherwise they won't like it and they won't watch it. So my ending is, that's generally the ending, but after, let's say 2 years into Jon Snow's reign, he abdicates the throne. So instead of having this, and he wouldn't, there was, so you kind of
advocates in his favor.
So you make the parallels to Maester Aemon, where the Targaryens wanted Maester Aemon to be king. He turned it down. He wound up staying as a Maester of the Citadel. He ends up going to the Wall. So Jon Snow would basically, so you have a similar ending, but you got there a different way. Daenerys is dead. The army is defeated. The monarchy is generally asunder. You don't exactly know where it goes. So what Jon Snow would do, and this is kind of a thematic thing of the Targaryens made the Seven Kingdoms one, right? Mm-hmm. So the final Targaryen king, King Jon Snow, would make the one kingdom 7 again.
All right, so he abdicates in favor of all the local.
Yeah, so basically he declares all the different former kingdoms of Westeros. Basically, it's an enforced secession. He allows them all to become separate kingdoms again. That's his final rule as king. He abdicates, goes north, roll credits.
All right. Yeah. I would have much preferred to have watched yours, but that's a mile. That's a totally great story. Yeah, I mean, I just noticed you got a little Jon Snow thing going yourself, don't you?
Well, I mean,
grow the beard.
I mean, the hair, yes. The abs, no. So
just keep your shirt on. It's fine.
But yeah, beggars can't be choosers. So, but you're exactly right. So, Bryan, before we wrap up, so where can people go to get Open Borders, all your other books, find more information about Bryan Caplan?
Yeah, so easiest has got to be Amazon, but there's some physical bookstores, it's Barnes and Noble. So, like all places where books are sold, I would recommend. But yeah.
2 questions. I have a question just for you, and then a fun question that we always do for everybody. The first one is, Bryan, if I come to attend some of your lectures, will you grade my papers?
I will. I'd be happy to do it.
That's good news. And then finally, now I don't know if you've ever seen an episode of The Gold Standard before, but we've asked a lot of people, is a hot dog a sandwich? But I consider the science settled. It is a sandwich. That is the libertarian position. And we've also had questions such as, is cereal soup? Is a Pop-Tart a ravioli? And if you have a lasagna and you stack another lasagna on it, is that 2 lasagnas or just a lasagna? But you're not going to get any of those questions.
Okay.
This is the one for you. If a tomato is a fruit, and it is ketchup a smoothie?
Is ketchup a smoothie? I'd say no, because a smoothie is something you drink straight, and you would not drink ketchup straight.
But is the way that you consume it how you identify the product?
I believe it is. Yes. So a smoothie is a beverage, not a sauce. That's where I would go with this. Not convinced.
Well, nobody's perfect, so I'm sorry, everybody at home. Bryan had the wrong answer. Ketchup is indeed a smoothie. That's just how it is. It's an inconvenient truth, as Al Gore liked to say. Bryan, thank you so much for being on the show, man. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was a ton of fun. Yep. So, of course, Open Borders is more important than Game of Thrones in reality, but I could be totally wrong about Game of Thrones, but I am not wrong about Open Borders. Read the book.
Well, thank you so much for saying that. I'm sorry, it just popped into my head. One more quick thing, and we're going to take a commercial break. In Game of Thrones, Jon Snow wanted to settle the wildlings on the gift. Do you think that there is a palatable political argument to say that we can have more immigration and we're going to nudge them to move to parts of the country that's open? Think of Midwest.
Yeah, or Detroit.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yes. Sure. I mean, that would, if you could just have some kind of federal program where people can get special state-based visas or something like that, just to go and raise the numbers, I think there's a lot to be said for that. And sure. So again, I'm not someone who says my way or the highway. I'm willing to take what I can get.
I just wanted to figure out a way to tie Game of Thrones back into Open Borders.
Yeah.
So
All right,
there you go. Guys, thank you so much for listening. We will be right back after this commercial break.
Have you ever been talking politics with a friend and told, if you don't like it here, you should just move to Somalia?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, from the sandy beaches of Mogadishu, Sherry and I bring you Postcards from Somalia, one of the newer products of Little L Productions, where we take on all of the fallacies of the people who say, if you don't like it, you can just get out. Your ad could be playing right now, reaching thousands of potential customers. Sadly, it's not, but it could be. Find out how to be an advertised sponsor for The Gold Standard with Alan Mosley. Email us at tgsalanmosley@gmail.com.
Oh boy, that came up to me.
Hey,
listen, you need to let this whole Game of Thrones thing go, man. Seriously, you just got to let it go.
No,
really.
well, okay. So no, you said that the other day. I've already rebuked you on
Well,
this.
you can rebuke
it's
me all
not
you want.
about letting go of the. Well, I know that you don't even read the books or watch the show, so you literally don't matter.
Yeah, okay.
You literally don't matter.
All right,
No,
I'll accept that. I'll accept.
no,
that.
what
I'll
I'm
accept
saying
that.
is that look, the show ended terribly. Look, we're all on the bandwagon for the books. Now, what Bryan was
I
talking.
respect that. I respect.
Oh,
that.
hold on.
Okay.
What Bryan was talking about, though, to be clear, is that he thinks the books have gone off the rails too. Like he's pulling no punches with George R.R. Martin. What I was trying to say is that this is how I would fix the show if we weren't going to go too far back. Like we're only going to fix like this year. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. But when has a book and a movie ever lived up to a book?
Well, generally no. Although most people would argue the Lord of the Rings movies were very good. Of course, they're not exactly like the books, but they're well done.
Yeah.
So, but the point being is that at this point we're just totally on the hype train for the next book, Winds of Winter.
There you go.
But I think what people are scared of is the fact that if the show ended this badly, how much of that was just the showrunners being terrible versus how much of that can we expect to see in the next couple of books, which is going to make us all depressed.
Yeah, you just have to wait
we don't like it. So Bryan just comes right out and says, "I don't like this. Here's why." What I'm saying is that I'm willing to be convinced that it can be fixed. I guess is what I'm trying to say.
You have hope.
I have hope. They don't pay me enough to fix their scripts for them. That's what it is.
You heard it right here, ladies and gentlemen. He has hope.
Yeah. So going back to the laptop really quick, because we didn't do this during the interview segment. So bcaplan.com, that's Bryan's website, where you can find a list of his books, some of his other writings, links to the econ log, all that good stuff that he does on a regular basis. Also, so he said on Amazon, so there's the Amazon link right there, Open Borders, The Science and Ethics of Immigration, hardcover, paperback, Kindle. There's no audiobook, but you don't want the audiobooks. This is a graphic novel. Yeah. It's got all the artwork in there from Zach Wienersmith.
That's cool.
That's why. Yeah, you want this. I got to tell you, I read it in like 2 days, and then I read it again. Well, I actually did. Because it's that good.
That's cool.
Now you know me. I don't say that all the time.
Yeah. Plus you're a really fast reader, so.
Well, it's a graphic novel.
Yeah. I mean, it's all pictures.
Yeah.
It's like a comic book.
And then finally, I just wanted to mention really quickly because you can also find this over at SMBC Comics. So Zach Wienersmith, who's the illustrator for SMBC Comics, who's an awesome artist, by the way, and I really enjoy his comics as well. So they have a link as well to Open Borders. I mean, for people who totally have not seen the book at all, look, like you can literally see, like it's a graphic novel,
really
right?
Sweet,
like it's got the really cool illustrations and everything.
Yeah, that's
so
great.
It's very accessible. It's something that's easy to digest, and I think it does in a relatively short space, like goes a long way.
Cool.
Towards addressing concerns.
Yeah.
So anyway, guys, remember, it is facebook.com/TGS Alan Mosley. Twitter is @Alan Mosley. Go to our website, which is thegoldstandardpodcast.com.
That's right.
Patreon's patreon.com/TGS Alan Mosley.
Yes, sir.
Dude, bro, who was upset. We're on iTunes and Stitcher and Google Play and TuneIn and all your podcasting platforms.
That's right.
So it's not my fault. It's your fault. What a good host I am that I berate my audience
Blame
like
your
that.
audience. That's right.
Guys, thank you so much, and we will see you next week.